let's go. All right, so what number are we on?
R.
R? Okay, we're starting R today. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right, so this is the segregation in the United States, okay? This is to give you an idea of where segregation is in the 1950s. The red states all have mandatory segregation. Okay, they all have mandatory segregation. This means you have no choice about it. Like if you own a restaurant in Louisiana, even if you don't believe in segregation, you still must do it or you go to jail. Okay? In green states, it's forbidden, no segregation at all. Blue states are kind of a mix. The yellow states mostly just left it up to the individual businesses and schools and things. So you could have something like in Utah where like West High School has no segregation, but East High School does. Right? That would be the way that the yellow states all handle it, right? It's kind of a case by case basis. Or like the town of Murray is segregated, but the town of Salt Lake is not, which is exactly what happened. Yes. Okay. So this is what we're dealing with here. Now, it becomes apparent to the civil rights movement that in order to fight segregation, the thing that they must fix first is segregation in the schools. Okay, so number one priority for the civil rights groups is the schools. Why are the schools number one? Why not restaurants or buses or stores? Why schools? What do you think? Somebody? Mike, what do you think? What's your instinct on that?
They have the biggest impact on the future.
Okay, all right. That sounds like a poster in a third grade classroom.
Yeah, it does.
Okay,
That's all I know.
that's all you know. All right, well, all right. How about you, Yash?
I think it's just, yeah, it's just that they want to start with students as the first place, just because, I mean, it's similar to what Michael said, just because they're the next generation, they're the kids of the people, the activists.
Okay, Pooja?
Is it because like with like right after the New Deal stuff and like the redlining and the blockbusting, all their schools just don't have the funding, so they need access to just a better school system and better resources. And
Okay.
having access to like white schools would give them that.
Yeah, the black schools are particularly bad. Now they don't really know about the redlining stuff yet. That's going to be something that comes up later, right? We looking back in time, we can see that, but at the time they didn't. You know, you're using future knowledge on that, right? But the reality is that the black schools were terrible. Okay, you guys are getting back to this. This is the root of Booker T. Washington's argument, right? Is that the root of all freedom is education, right? Education is the thing that unlocks everything. Education equals money. Education equals jobs. Education equals freedom, right? It's intellectual freedom. It's spiritual freedom. It's creative freedom. It's everything. Okay? There's another reason. There's another reason. Can you guys think of another reason? It has to do with the time it takes. Education takes forever to fix. If you desegregate today and fix the segregation today, the black community still won't see the advantage for 30 years. You have to wait for those kids to age through the entire system. They have to become kindergartners, first graders, 12th graders. They have to go to college. They have to come back. They have to start businesses, right? You're looking at a 30-year lag time on education. So you have to start now. Okay? The other part about it has to do with the psychology of segregation. The only way that you change a student's self-image is by redoing that whole social situation that is psychologically hurting them, right? You have to stop telling the kid he's stupid before he can believe that he's smart, right? If I tell him he's stupid every day, he's going to grow up and believe he's stupid, right? Okay, the last one here is, there's two of them, okay? This is another thing that Booker T. Washington focused on. They can't take education away from you. Once you have somebody who's educated, you can't strip that away. They can burn my house down. They can take my money. They can murder my family, but you can't take my education. The education is in me, right? In order to take the education, you have to kill me. Here's the last thing. Children are more sympathetic. This is a strategic political argument, right? Children are more sympathetic. It's pretty easy for white people in the 1950s to hate a black man. Let's be honest here. It's pretty easy in 2020 also, I would say. Right? It's relatively easy to hate men. Right? Right? Men are the least sympathetic group. Nobody cares about men in that way, and especially disinclined, unprivileged men like black men. Right? Nobody cares about them. But children, it's a lot harder to hate a kid. A lot harder. Right? If I argue for segregation, to get rid of segregation to help this 40-year-old man, no one cares. If I argue for to end segregation to help this 6-year-old girl, people will listen. Right? It's a strategic argument there. Okay? So the NAACP focuses on this. All through the 1930s and 40s, it becomes apparent that schools are the battleground. That's the primary battleground of the civil rights movement. So let's do this. Okay, we're gonna get the case Brown versus the Board of Education. The full name of the case is Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. That's the full name. People usually just call it Brown v. Board or Brown v. Board of Education. So the Brown case is, the defendant here is the plaintiff, I'm sorry. The plaintiff here is Oliver Brown, a man named Oliver Brown. Now, Oliver Brown lives in Topeka, Kansas. He lives in Topeka, Kansas, and he's a black man, and he has two black daughters, two daughters. I think at the time of the case, his oldest daughter, I think, is in 4th or 5th grade. Okay, so she's an elementary school kid. They purposely bought a house near a good school in Topeka, Kansas, and his daughters are only like a block or two away. They're only a couple of blocks away from a good elementary school. They could walk to that school. But because of segregation, his daughters have to walk 7 blocks across 3 railroad lines. Across 3 rail lines. 7 blocks across 3 rail lines in order to get to a bus that takes them to a school on the other side of Topeka. They could walk to school, but the school, they aren't allowed to. Now, Oliver Brown, he's a member of the NAACP. He's an active member. He's like a contributor to the NAACP. He's not a lawyer himself. And so he asks the NAACP for help. The NAACP at this point is pursuing cases like this across the country, right? Our judicial system is divided into districts, right? And so you'll have like a district that is like just California, and then a district that is like Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado, and New Mexico, right? And then you have a district that is like, you know, the Carolinas and Virginia, or so, you know what I mean? We have these districts all over the country, and the NAACP is challenging this in all of the districts. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, the case actually includes families in South Carolina, Washington D.C., Virginia, and Delaware, and Kansas. Okay, now the Supreme Court in 1951, the case is brought in 1951, and the Supreme Court avoids the case. They don't want it in 1951. And they don't want it because the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court says, this case is so big and so divisive and so important that if we have a razor-thin margin in the courts, if we have a ruling of 5-4, the country won't listen to it. He's making this strategic argument right? Which is why he says we can't listen to this. We can't take the case. The NAACP keeps on challenging the cases, right? The way the Supreme Court works, the Supreme Court gets hundreds of cases every year and they choose which ones they want, right? Some cases they can just hold on to and say in the future maybe. Some cases they can just reject, and other cases they take. The Supreme Court keeps waiting. The Chief Justice dies in 1953. The Chief Justice dies in 1953, and Dwight Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, nominates Earl Warren to the court. Earl Warren becomes the new Chief Justice. This is what we call the Warren Court. Earl Warren becomes the new Chief Justice. Now we need to better know a Warren. Earl Warren was the governor of California. He was the governor of California, and he was a very strong person on civil rights. Now, the fact that he's the governor of California matters for the story, okay? It matters for the story because politicians are good at convincing people, right? A central feature of a politician's job is wheeling and dealing, making deals and convincing people, right? It's like a central thing that politicians do. And so when Warren gets on the court, Warren sits down with the other justices and says, we need to work this out. Warren says, we're going to take the segregation case, but we're going to work this out. We need to have a unanimous ruling. So they take Brown versus the board. The case gets called this. The Supreme Court opts to take all of these cases from the different states, combine them all into one case because they're all kind of arguing the same thing. Brown is the name that they use because Brown is the first in alphabetical order. It's not because his case is more important, it's just alphabetical. They just listed the people in alphabetical order and Brown was the first one. Okay? That's why his is first, but his case covers all of the other ones as well. Okay? So to be clear. So let's meet the lawyer who's going to argue this. Okay? The man right here, his name is Thurgood Marshall. Right here. Thurgood Marshall. So Thurgood Marshall is the leader of the NAACP. He's been in the NAACP at this point for like 20 years, okay? Thurgood Marshall is from Baltimore, Maryland. He's from Baltimore, Maryland, and I'll tell you what, Marylanders are very proud of him. When I lived in Maryland, where there's Thurgood Marshall statues all over the place. All over the place. My graduate school was in Annapolis, Maryland, and I walked past a Thurgood Marshall statue every single day. The airport is called Thurgood Marshall Airport. The street going down the center of Baltimore is Thurgood Marshall Avenue, right? They are very proud of this man. He is going to become the first black justice on the Supreme Court. Kennedy will put him on the Supreme Court in another decade. In the 1960s, JFK will put him on. But for now, he's the leader of the NAACP and he's arguing the case. Marshall matters in his background. Thurgood Marshall matters in his background because Thurgood Marshall grew up in segregated Baltimore. He was not allowed to go to a good school. He was forced to go to a black school where the black school didn't have enough teachers, didn't have enough classrooms, and Thurgood Marshall was a very, 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 very brilliant and curious young boy. And so what he did is he went to the library and read books. And he checked out book after book after book after book after book after book. And the library wouldn't let him do it initially. The library was segregated and wouldn't let him in. And he kept challenging it and he kept coming in. Finally, he found a librarian that would bring the books out to him and give them to him on the stairs because they wouldn't let him into the library. Right? Thurgood Marshall's personal story is the story of Jim Crow segregation. Right? And part of Thurgood Marshall's story is that how exceptional it is that he was able to overcome this. He grew up in this part of Baltimore where most of his friends picked up guns instead of books. He had kids like shoot at him. He had kids that robbed him and stuff in the classrooms, right? And he talks about this in his court cases. He talks about the effects that this has on there. So he argues the case to the Supreme Court. And here's Warren's decision. Yujia, do you want to read it for us? Can you read it nice and loud for us? You got to undo your mic. There you go.
From the beginning?
Yeah.
Here there, oh, from that top.
Yeah.
I can't see the words up there.
You can't see it? Is it blocked off on your screens the way it
Yeah.
shares? All right, I'll start it off. It says the decision was unanimous. Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the opinion of the court.
Here,
Okay.
there are findings below that the Negroes and the white schools involved have been equalized or being equalized with respects to buildings, curriculums, qualifications, and salaries of teachers, and other tangible factors. Our decision, therefore, cannot turn on merely a comparison of these tangible factors in the Negroes and white schools involved in each of these cases. We must look instead to the effects of segregation itself on public education.
Okay, Drew.
Yes.
Read.
Today, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. Compulsory school attendance laws and the great expenditures for education both demonstrate our recognition of the importance of education to our democratic society. Today, it is a principal instrument in awakening the child to cultural values, in preparing him for a later professional training, and in helping him to adjust normally to his environment. In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity where the state has undertaken to provide it is a right which must be made available on all equal terms.
Good. Kira.
To separate children, or to separate them, children in grade school and high schools, from others of similar age and qualifications solely because of their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely to ever be undone. Whatever may have been the exact psychological knowledge at the time of Plessy versus Ferguson, this finding is amply supported by modern authority.
All right, Ilha, finish us off, man.
We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we hold that the plaintiffs and others similarly situated are deprived of the equal protection of the laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment.
Good ruling. Nicely done, Mr. Warren. Nicely done. All right, in your notes, make sure you put that the Brown versus Board of Education is a unanimous decision, 9-0. 9-0. Warren took all of the justices aside and he convinced them. It's a 9-0 decision. How often does the Supreme Court rule 9-0 on things? Like very rarely, right? Very, very rarely. It's something like 4% of the cases or something like that. It's a extremely rare case, right? And most of the time when the Supreme Court rules on something 9-0, it's like a really small, inconsequential like case that doesn't really matter, right? This is a case that redefines American society. This changes the lives of every single man, woman, and child in the country. And it was ruled 9-0. Okay? Separate can never be equal. Separate is inherently unequal. Okay? You have to, Warren says, separate is inherently unequal. That's his phrase. Right? It's not about the resource. It's not about the seat on the bus. It's not about the water in the drinking fountain. It's about power. And as long as it's about power, separate can never be equal. Okay? And the entire country listened to it, and they all agreed, and racism was over. Right? I think we can anticipate that there's a problem coming. Okay? What do you anticipate the southern states to do? Yeah, Drew?
They defied the court order and just continued segregating anyway.
Basically, exactly correct. Yeah, the southern states basically do exactly what Andrew Jackson did, right? If you guys remember from last year, what did Andrew Jackson do in the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia? Do you remember? Pooja, do you remember?
He said that like they could make that decision, but he wasn't going to enforce it.
Yeah, I believe Andrew Jackson said if the court wants to make that ruling, then they can come down here and and enforce it themselves. Right? The southern states say the same thing. They say if your California governor justice is going to make this ruling, then your California governor justice can come on down to Alabama and enforce it. The southern states basically say no. Yeah, Drew.
Is this where the whole story about, you know, the army coming in and escorting the kids to school comes in?
I don't want you to spoil the ending, Drew. I'm trying to build dramatic tension. Okay, this is building a narrative here,
Okay.
right? But yeah, you're right. You're right. That'll be next week. We'll get to that next week. But you're absolutely correct, Drew. Yeah. All right. The ruling happens in June of 1955. By August of 1955, the first students are trying to get into the desegregated schools. Okay, so Prince Edward County, Virginia, is the first group that tries to get in, right? And Prince Edward County is one of the biggest counties in Virginia. It's northern Virginia, right? And they try to get in. Now, some of the states desegregate almost instantly, right? Maryland has like dances in the streets as the crowds go out with their crowbars and rip the segregated signs off their walls, right? And Maryland is like kind of a southern state and kind of a northern state, right? Maryland's very urban. It's almost the entire state is a city, right? And Maryland is also like 65% black, right? So for Maryland, it's like a party, but for Virginia, it's like a funeral, right? So the Prince Edward County students, they try to enroll in the school, and Prince Edward County schools, they say, well, we're just going to have to see how this works. There's a lot of things we got to do. We got to count desks. We got to count chairs. We got to make sure there's enough room for all these new students to come into our schools. It's going to take a while. A lot of things we got to count. Right? So the NAACP, you guys probably recognize you should recognize Mr. Spotswood Robinson from our Elaine massacre case. The Elaine massacre case, he's the one who argues the case, right? Him and Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson both take the case back to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court does something that it's almost never done again, picks up one of its previous court cases and rules Brown 2. It's a separate ruling the next year, right? It's a separate ruling, and they get that ruling right away. Brown 2. This is what the Supreme Court says is an extension of Brown v. Board. They call it Brown 2, the sequel. Now, Browner. Okay. In Brown 2, the Supreme Court, and this quote is very, very important. The Supreme Court rules that the South must desegregate with all deliberate speed. All deliberate speed. That quote is a very important quote. Michael, what does with all deliberate speed mean?
I feel like it can be, it's almost like flexible. It's basically do it as soon as you can and not kind of putting deadlines on things.
Does it mean do it as soon as you can? Yash, what does deliberate mean?
I think it's just to do it, really fast, quickly, as fast as they can.
Yash says fast. Kira, do you say fast? Does deliberate mean fast?
I'd say deliberate speed means fast, yeah.
Interesting. Pooja, what do you think deliberate means?
Well, it's okay. First of all, with all deliberate speed is like really vague. So it's not even saying like it has to be done quickly. They're just saying it has to be done. So it allows all school boards to just kind of sit there and be like, oh, we're trying to deliberate on how to bring them in organized, but we're doing it, we promise.
Yeah. What does the word deliberate mean?
Means kind of to like discuss it, like talk it over, mull it over between amongst the people in charge.
Yeah. The problem with this is that deliberate means purposeful. The word deliberate means purposeful, right? If I say the girl drew that drawing very deliberately. Did she draw it quickly? I don't know. Right? She drew it purposefully. It means she wasn't just doodling. It means that she drew something she knew. It may have been fast, it may have been slow. I don't know. Here's the problem. I can run down the hallway deliberately. I can also walk down the hallway deliberately. Here's the issue. Warren didn't write this one. One of the other justices did. And the other justice is quoting a poem. He's quoting a poem. And it's a poem about the sunrise, where the sun rises above the mountains and the light moves across the valley with deliberate speed, waking the flowers to the morning day. In the poem, it means fast. In the poem, it means like fast, it means purposeful, it means that the light is happening and nothing can stop the light. The problem is, this isn't poetry. This isn't poetry, this is legal doctrine, right? And so all the southern states say, you got it, buddy, we'll move deliberately. All the southern states say, we'll be deliberate. We'll be deliberate all the time. Always deliberate. That's us. So, let's make our next letter R, Q, R, S, S. Yeah, Drew, you got a question?
Yeah, what does that woman's sign say in the second picture in the parentheses?
Let me see. We demand our...
The first one, actually. The one.
I have
Let's
lost
tell
4 years
Russia
of
about
education. Why 5? It says, I've lost 4 years of education. Why 5? Let's tell Russia about this.
Oh,
She's a socialist, right? She's a socialist. She's trying to she's sympathetic to the communists. Yeah, it's excellent. Okay. S, number S, big number S. Here's our response. Let's get to know Mr. Harry Byrd. Now, first of all, he has an excellent name for such a racist asshole. Harry Byrd. It's pretty excellent, right? All right, so it's unfortunate that with a name like Harry Byrd, he's not like a funny guy, right? You'd expect him to be funny, but he's not. He gives us this beautiful quote. It's a day of catastrophe, Black Monday, something like Pearl Harbor. This is what he says after the Brown ruling. Now, Harry Byrd is the senator of Virginia. He's the former governor of Virginia and current senator of Virginia. Current in 1955. He's dead now. But in 1955, he's the current senator from one of the senators of Virginia. He used to be the governor. He organizes something called massive resistance. Now, massive resistance is what he calls his massive resistance is a collection of political plans in order to support and expand segregation as much as possible. So within massive resistance, we have the Byrd Organization, named after himself. This is a collection, the Byrd Organization is a collection of Virginia politicians who are dedicated to preserving segregation. Pretty great, huh? Now, one of his asshole buddies named Gray also starts the Gray Commission. Now, the Gray Commission is the organization within Massive Resistance that is looking specifically at what they can do to keep schools segregated, right? They're examining school boards and school policies and, district policies and stuff, and they're trying to find every single loophole, everything they can find to keep the schools segregated for as long as possible. Lastly, we're going to get something really great here, the Stanley Plan. Raul, did you have a question? Or who was that? Somebody have a question? No? Okay. All right, so the Stanley Plan is named after the governor, Thomas Stanley of Virginia. The Stanley Plan basically says, if the federal government is going to force us to integrate our schools, then what we're going to do is shut our school systems down completely. Now, you guys did not react correctly. You guys should be surprised by how bad that is. So I'm going to say it again, but this time you need to be surprised. All right, so Stanley says that rather than desegregate the schools, he is going to shut the school systems down. Ilha, I do not believe you were surprised. All right, Ilha, it's a good thing that you are smart at history because you're not very good at acting, my friend. Yes. All right, so Stanley shuts down the school systems. Like, no joke, he shuts them down in Norfolk, Charlottesville, and Warren County. And they just shut the schools down completely. Norfolk, Charlottesville, and Warren County. You may remember Charlottesville from the white supremacist demonstrations at the beginning of the Trump administration, right? Charlottesville today is the home of the Aryan Nation. It's also home to the Proud Boys, the organization that got a shout out at the presidential debate the other night. Yeah, pretty great, huh? Very fine people on both sides. Yes, very fine. That's the Trump quote, right? All right, so Stanley shuts down all of the schools, completely all the schools. Now this is, you may feel that that's really extreme. Your surprised faces convinced me how extreme you find this, right? But don't worry, Stanley's got a plan, because the white parents are really upset. The white parents want their precious children to have an education, and they even tell Stanley how important it is for education. Education is the key to their future. So their kids need an education. So Stanley understands how important schools are. So what he does is he gives them public funding to send their kids to private school. He starts a fund, he starts a government fund letting white parents take the money from the government fund and send their kids to private schools. Now, I can hear you guys already saying that there's a problem here, right? Kira's already in my ears saying, but wait, Mr. Veenstra, won't those private schools get too crowded with all those extra kids? Right? Smart question, right? It's a very smart question. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so what he does, Stanley, he lets the private schools use the public school buildings and teachers. But because they're all paying tuition for the private schools, the black kids aren't allowed to go. Welcome to Virginia, everybody. The Stanley Plan stays in effect for 5 years. 5 years. Pretty bonkers, huh? This is like some funhouse mirror crap. All right, I think this is a good place for us to stop for now. Good place for us to stop. Do you guys have comments or questions or anything? Any issues? What's going on here? Why can't I stop recording?
I do have a question